So we'll start again then. Everybody, just first of all, I want to wish you a happy Channukah to everybody. And I'd like to speak today just a little bit about some of the ideas of Channukah and see if we could just take a deeper perspective into it of what's going on. First of all, Channukah is probably, it's such a joyous time of the year for us. It's something we look forward to so much, and we have such fond memories of it. Latkes and sifkariot and donuts and family gatherings and dreidel and gifts to each other and all sorts of wonderful things. And at the same time, it's just such an enormously deep Yom Tov, a deep holiday with so many things going on. And so I want to just take us a little bit to that depth, if I can, and see if we could just get a little bit of a deeper appreciation of what's going on around us. So let's begin. First of all, there's a famous question that we ask on Channukah, and the question is: we know that we light candles for 8 days, and it corresponds to the miracle that took place at the time of the Second Temple, to the time of the Yavanim, time of the Greeks. So their battle against us really began, as we know, as we call like a Kulturkampf, a war waged against Judaism. It wasn't waged against us physically at first as a people. What they really wanted, they liked us. What they really wanted us, though, was to give up our belief in Hashem, give up our Torah, so to speak, and just be part of them. And it was promoted by, unfortunately, in that situation, by many Jews, Hellenists, we call them, Mityavnim, who also fell, sort of followed suit to that, were enamored with Greek wisdom, with Greek culture, with the beauty which is Greek. Greece was Greece, and there was a lot of beauty, tremendous beauty, enormous beauty. The problem with their beauty was it was a beauty that was separate from Hashem. A beauty which was trying to say you could have this physical world, but you don't need to have the morality that guides when you know Hashem is the source of the physical world. In fact, Greek philosophy believed in what's called a kadmon. Kadmon, really means, or I maybe say bli kadmon, that there was no beginning, that the world was always here. There was no first cause, as it were. And it's interesting that the gematria of Yavan is Galgal, which is Galgal 66, which means a wheel going around and around and around, Galgal. And it's brought out because that was the way they viewed the world, as a Galgal. There was no point of origination. And when there's no point of origination, when there's no beginning, it means there's no creator. And of course, if there's no creator, there are no laws that restrict us or bind us or bind us to anything higher than our own mind. And that's what Greek philosophy went after, in Greek culture. They went after the human mind. And they utilized the human mind to an amazing extent through science and investigation of this world to bring out a lot of the innovation that even we utilize today. But it's interesting, this idea that there's no first cause, like a wheel, Galgal, that's the gematria, 66, Yavan, Yud Vav Nun, is just something which is very fascinating. And apparently that was part of modern science until very recently. Until the Big Bang in the 1970s, when Arnold Penzias and Bob Wilson at Bell Laboratory detected backlash from what we call now the Big Bang. Then there wasn't a name for it, but they detected radioactive backlash of an original explosion. And from that, they realized that things were expanding, the world was expanding outward from a first point, a first cause. That was a breakthrough in modern science, that there was a first cause. It's called the Big Bang. And of course, that first cause is nothing new to us as Jews, because we've always believed in a first cause. We just understand Hashem is the one who caused it. The Big Bang was caused by God. But Greek philosophy didn't have such a concept, and Greek philosophy influenced really modern science up until the 1970s, until we realized in modern science discovered a first cause, that the world started the size of a mustard seed, like the Ramban says, according to the Zohar, and expanded outward. So the Greeks in philosophy, they love philosophy. They love Jewish wisdom even. They had our Torah translated into what we call now the Septuagint. It's called the Targum Shivim, in which they placed 70 rabbis into 70 different rooms, and they translated our Torah into Greek. It was the first time the Torah had ever been translated, which, by the way, is one of the reasons we mourn on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, is that 17th of Tammuz, that we're mourning that translation. Because when we took our Torah now and it's translated outward, of course there's going to be distortion in it. You know, it's interesting, by the way, that when it was translated into Greek, that they placed 70 rabbis into 70 different rooms, and one of the great miracles was they all translated it correctly. Not correctly, they all translated it similarly. Why is that so amazing? Because there are different verses in the Torah which, taken out of context, can be totally misunderstood. You know, for example, it says in Bereshit, it says, Nasa Adam B'Tzalmenu. It said, let's make man in our image. Let us make man. Nasa Adam. Let us make man. Who's God speaking to? Well, if you're an idolater like the Greeks, you must assume that he's speaking to some pagan god up there, some other god. Who is he speaking to? Rashi tells us, quoting our sages, he's discussing with the angels. And we learn from that such an important concept. Before you make major decisions in life, God is teaching humility. He's teaching us what we call derech eres. You don't make a big decision without first consulting, even with a people or a group that's lower than you, because who's the same level as Hashem. But the pagan world would take that out of context, and they would say, let us make man, there must be more than one God. So the rabbis in each room, translating separately, all translated as, I shall make man. I will make man. Not let us make man, but I shall make man, in order not to confuse the pagan mind. Different examples like that. We mourn it, by the way, because it's not a translation; it's a commentary, and it's a step removed from the actual original source, as are all translations. That's why we need to study things always in the actual Hebrew. But the war that they waged against us was against our belief, was against our trust in the Almighty. And that's why we know that they made certain decrees at a certain point where they forbade the practice of Brit Milah. They forbade observing the Shabbos, Shabbat. They forbade Rosh Chodesh. These were three things that the Greeks focused in on, and if you think about it, why these three things? So it's interesting. Let's just analyze each one for a moment. Brit Milah is really a statement that the human being is born with an imperfection, and it's the job of mankind to take our potential and actualize it and become perfect. We have to take a part of the body which is a blockage, as it were, and we have to start fixing ourselves and repairing ourselves, correcting ourselves. There's something more that the human being has to become. We have to generate and create ourselves into a moral human being. And that's why the covenant with God is of course, on the part of the body, which is the part of the body of desire and passion. And we basically say we're going to control what's natural. What's natural isn't perfection. What's natural is the tool to become greater when utilized properly and when controlled. So the first thing we're saying, Brit Milah speaks a language totally against Greek philosophy. It's saying the human being is not perfect. God is perfect, and we need to become godlike by controlling ourselves, controlling passion, controlling our nature. So you can understand why Brit Milah might be something which upsets that philosophy. Just there's a famous story they tell of a philosopher at Chicago, at the University of Chicago, and it was interesting story. I think it's told by Bertrand Russell. And the story was that apparently he was a very well-known and accomplished philosopher in ethics, in works and books on ethics, and in the 1950s somehow got caught up in some unethical, unmoral encounter with one of the female students, apparently. And the students at the University of Chicago were upset by this. They were bothered by this, and they had him come before a student court, and they want to understand how could he justify himself as a philosopher, as an ethicist, as someone who is living a life of great ideas. How could he justify behavior which doesn't seem to be that of befitting a person of such a great ethical mind? And his defense was very interesting. He said, "It's true, I've written more books on ethics maybe than anybody in this university. I've written more books on ethics maybe more than anybody in maybe in America, on any university campus." He said, "But I have one question for all of you." He said, "Do you expect your math professor to be a triangle? Does your math professor have to be a triangle? Just like he doesn't have to be a triangle. Why do I have to be ethical? In other words, just because I have a big idea doesn't mean I have to live it. If you're a mathematician, you don't have to be the triangle. Just show the beauty of mathematics. I show the beauty of ethics. Do I have to be ethical?" Interesting. Brit Milah is the covenant on the part of the body of the human being, of the Jew, which basically says that we have to adhere in practice to a higher ideal. That what's natural and normal needs to be controlled and refined and directed. So we understand why the Greeks, who so valued the human being and so valued a world without God, because a world without God allows the human being to really choose their path of morality. We understand why Brit Milah would upset them. Shabbat, what does Shabbat say? Shabbat is a declaration, of course, that there's a first cause. There's a creator to all of this. Not only is there a creator, but the creator is involved with his creation, loves his creation, is involved with us, cares about us. In fact, that's what we say every Friday night. We stand for the Kiddush, testimony that God is the creator of the world. We're witnesses. And we basically say two things. Number one, you created this world. And number two, you care about this world, as demonstrated by the fact that you took us out of Egypt. You changed nature for us. Nature isn't a finite. Nature is something which God controls. And when need be, he'll change it because he cares about us. Because he loves us. He wants us to come forth from Egypt. It's also interesting that they forbade Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh, we know, is the first of the month. And what happens is the way we determine the first of the month is when witnesses come to Jerusalem having spotted the new moon. That's when the new month begins. And depending on when the new moon is spotted, everything, all the Jewish holidays, the Jewish cycle, the Jewish calendar follows it, progresses after it. For example, in Tishrei, when the new moon is spotted in Tishrei, so we know that the first of Tishrei will be Rosh Hashanah. 10 days later will be Yom Kippur. Another 5 days later will be Sukkot. Or Nisan, when spotted the first of Nisan. 15 days later is Pesach, is Passover. So the Jewish calendar depends on Rosh Chodesh. And Rosh Chodesh is determined when we spot the new moon. By the way, we don't do that anymore. Today, it's been since about the 3rd or 4th century. The calendar has been prepared based on astronomical configurations that the rabbis knew from the Talmud and the great sages put together. But this is the way the system really was set up to work, and it did work like this we had the Beis Hamikdash, of course, during for many centuries. So what's interesting about Rosh Chodesh is, well, number one, they didn't want Rosh Chodesh on a simple level, because if you want to destroy the Jewish life cycle, ban witnesses coming on Rosh Chodesh and declaring the new moon. How can you, if you can't determine the new moon, you can't have the holidays. But there's something even deeper in it. What does Rosh Chodesh speak to? The way we determine the Jewish month is when we say the month begins. That's to say, when two witnesses come to the court in Jerusalem and they say, we've spotted the new moon. They're investigated. Where do you see it? How do you see it? And whether they're seen to be telling the truth, they declare it is Rosh Chodesh. The new month has begun. So question is, supposing they're wrong, supposing they saw something that confused their eye, or maybe they just were misled. Is it still Rosh Chodesh? Absolutely yes. because God gave over the determination of the new month to man, to us. Oh, but it doesn't make sense. Wait a minute. If we got the wrong day, we're going to miss the day of Rosh Hashanah. Maybe it's not really Rosh Hashanah today. Maybe in heaven they're not actually opening the ledgers. It's not Day of Judgment. Maybe it's going to be tomorrow. And if it's not, and that today's not Day of Rosh Hashanah, 10 days later it's not going to be Yom Kippur either. We're not going to have the right day. Like, what's going on? The answer is God says, I follow you. You tell me when I begin. So first of all, it's a magnificent elevation of the human being, what the human being is all about from a Jewish perspective. That we have such potential that we could be partners with God. You know, that's a magnificent idea of what the human being is all about. And that is the Jewish vision. But what upset the Greeks in this is that basically Rosh Chodesh says that time itself isn't even natural. If you believe that nature is everything and there's a world that doesn't have a first cause, the Jewish vision that says, no, even time isn't natural and normal. You can't even determine, there's nothing in nature that determines a new month even. We say when it's a new month. Even our seasons and our holidays, they don't just follow seasonally. It's determined when we come to a court and we say, now it begins. In other words, nature is, so to speak, in flux. It's in our hands. God gave it in our hands to determine when the new month begins. So we say there's nothing natural and normal in this world. That even time seems to be a divine, time is a divine gift. So the Greeks looked at us. They loved our Torah in terms of the wisdom of our Torah. But the purpose of our Torah, which is the purpose of living a life of morality, a life connected to a deeper ideal, a life to say that man is not in control, but we have to submit to the will of the Almighty. That's where the battle raged. And that's what they were trying to undo and uproot from the Jewish heart. And this is something which reached a crescendo, reached a point where ultimately we realized the only way to defend ourselves is through battle and through taking up arms and actually going to war against the Greek army. Now, you know, when we think about this, first of all, it's a daunting task. You know, the Greek army was the most powerful army in the world. It was the most mechanized army. They fought with elephants, and elephants don't sound like so modern, but they put plates and armor on the elephants, and the soldiers got up there with spears, and it was like a tank. It was a modern day tank warfare. And those who opposed the Greek army, the Jewish army, were the Hashmonaim, the Maccabee, and it was basically an army of Torah scholars, rabbis, Torah scholars, who were resisting. The odds were not in their favor. And yet, through miracle upon miracle upon miracle, over a course of a number of years, they were victorious in vanquishing the Greek army. Now, it's interesting, by the way, that Channukah and Purim are our two rabbinic holidays. When I mean rabbinic, there's nothing in the Torah explicitly that talks about Channukah or Purim, because they both coincide with historical moments, historical events that occurred in Jewish history. Purim, which occurred about 400 years before Channukah, was, when Achashverosh and Haman wanted to destroy and annihilate the Jewish nation physically. And what did we do? Esther had the nation fast, and as a result of Esther, and a great miracle occurred, as we know, and what Haman tried to do to us, it was all turned around. Mahapechu. Channukah, 400 years later, was almost the opposite of Purim in some ways. The Greeks did not want to destroy us physically, because as we've been speaking about, the Greeks liked us. They want to keep us around. They liked our Torah. It's a beautiful philosophy book. But they wanted to destroy our connection to God. They wanted to sever the root of our connection to Hashem. Now, how interesting it is, by the way, when our enemies want to destroy us physically, what do? We fast and we pray, as in the story of Purim. When our enemies want to destroy us spiritually, what do? We fight. It sounds like it should be the opposite. It destroys physically, we should fight. Destroys spiritually, we should pray. The answer, no. When our enemies want to destroy us physically, okay, now's the time to rely upon Hashem. Hashem, you can thwart our enemies. But if they want to destroy us spiritually, that we cannot rely on Hashem for. Our spiritual existence, our connection to God is something we have to choose. And we have to sometimes fight for it, if need be. That's not something we can sit back and pray to Hashem and say, Hashem, you'll take care of it. When it comes to our spiritual connection, our spiritual resistance has to come from within ourselves. And therefore, Channukah is a time of spiritual resistance. And for spiritual resistance, we have to fight. It's only to live a life connected to God. God says that's up to you. Your free choice dictates that. You can't pray to me for that. If that's important to you, then you have to do something about it. So interesting it is. When our enemies want to destroy us spiritually, we fight. When they want to destroy us physically, we pray. Which is very counterintuitive to some extent. But I think it makes a lot of sense. Because a spiritual connection to Hashem, that has to come from us. You know, it's interesting. The whole holiday of Channukah really speaks to this, because the way we celebrate it is interesting. That if you look at the Shulchan Aruch, there aren't so many things we need to do on Channukah. You know, for example, it says it's a good idea to get together and to have a Su'udah. We're not commanded to have a meal like we are in Purim. Purim, it's a mitzvah to have a meal. On Channukah, if you do get together for a meal, turn it into something spiritual. It's brought down in Shulchan Aruch. Use it as an opportunity for Hallel, to say praise to Hashem, Tishbachos, praises to God. Use it as an opportunity to connect to Hashem. But you have to do it. In other words, the command to do it is not coming from above. God's saying this has to come from you. Because the whole holiday is about regenerating yourself spiritually. And to regenerate yourself spiritually, to revive yourself spiritually, you have to bring it forth. You have to turn that meal into a spiritual occasion. And if you do, then you have a real Channukah party, Channukah Suda. You're just going to eat the latkes and the donuts, but no words of Torah and no songs of praise. We haven't really done what we're supposed to be doing at that Suda. Now again, we're not commanded, but we have to turn into that. It's also interesting, the one thing we are obligated to do is to light the Menorah. And of course, that is the central feature of the day. And it's interesting, what is the command to light a fire? To light a fire, really, to light the menorah really means, gather oil. What's oil? Oil, we know, is from an olive. And you have to get that oil, you have to break the olive, you have to crush the olive, you have to squeeze that olive. And once you've broken it down, what do? Then you have something so pure. The most valuable part of the olive is that part which only comes when you break it down, the morale says. And what does that mean? It's the olive oil is always a sign, a symbol for us of the spiritual world. In other words, how do you get to the spiritual world? You have to break the physical world down. You have to crush it, you have to squeeze it, you have to think about it, you have to work on it. The person just sits back, you're not going to see it. A little bit of work, a little bit of effort, you got to crush it. Understand what's behind the scenes. Just like the oil is behind the scenes in the olive. You don't see that oil right away, but that's the richest part of the olive. The olive sells for whatever it sells for. The oil sells for a lot of money. You have to squeeze it out. That's a metaphor for the spiritual world. Then what do we need to do? Take a small wick, place it in there, and you ignite the spark. You strike that match. The energy has to come from you. You have to create the oil. You have to get to the spiritual world. And then if you want to see the glow in that spiritual world illuminate your life, you have to do the effort. You have to you have to light the fire. It has to come from below. The whole holiday speaks to this idea of really what it's all about. Really, the whole idea is about fighting spiritually. That effort has to come from us. Nobody can do it for us. A beautiful, beautiful concept. There's a famous question on Channukah, and this is what I just want to address right now. famous question asked by the Beis Yosef, by the author of the Shulchan Aruch. And it's a question that has, I believe, I have a sefer at home, a book at home called Menorah that has 100 answers to this question. We're not going to go through 100 of them right now. We'll go through one. The question is this. So what happened? We fought a war against the Greeks. And in this war, it was miraculous. There were miracles. Now, it's interesting, the miracles weren't always so apparent. And if you looked at the miracles or at the war, you might size it up differently. If you meet a modern, a secular history text about the battles, you might say the Jews, they knew the topography better, the land better. They were able to fight almost like in guerrilla warfare, almost like the Viet Cong fought in Vietnam. And as a result, we were able to defeat a very powerful mechanized army, just like the Viet Cong succeeded in after a long period of time, it succeeded in causing America to exit Vietnam. So, when you understand land, topography, you understand the mountains, the hills, you're working together, you have motivation, you can succeed. But when you think about that question a little bit deeper, it doesn't make much sense. Someone once said it's like a bunch of rabbis fighting the United States Marines. I'd bet on the Marines. I think I would. But this was the rabbis fighting the Marines, and they won. But it wasn't always so visible to the eye. So here's the question. The question I have for everybody is like this, and this is the Beit Yosef asked this question. He said, so we understand when finally, after a number of years, we came back to our temple, which had been defiled by the Greeks, which had been, idols had been placed there, and we came in, and we cleaned it, and we wanted to start serving once again in our temple, the Beit HaMikdash. And we wanted to light the Menorah of the Beit HaMikdash, not an 8 candelabra, but a seven rung candelabra. And to do so, of course, we needed oil. And this part of the miracle was we found a flask of oil that had been sealed and hadn't been contaminated. And we lit, and without going into all the differences about the oil and everything like that, and did we need to have pure oil, not pure oil, it's a whole different discussion. But the miracle that we're familiar with is that it was enough oil to burn one night, and it didn't burn one night, it burned 8 nights. And that was noticed. That's an overt miracle. A miracle which really turned around the laws of nature. It's natural for oil to burn one night. It's unnatural. It's lo TV. It's against the laws of nature to go 8 days. So this, of course, attracted attention and made the Jewish nation fully aware this is an open miracle that's going on. But here's the question that Beit Yosef asked. He says like this, the Yosef Cairo. He said, wait a minute. So why do we keep Channukah for 8 days? Well, you tell me about, because the miracle of 8 days, the oil was supposed to burn one day, and it burned additional 7, adds up to 8. And as a result, we want to keep Channukah for that 8-day period. But wait a minute. Isn't it natural for oil to burn one day? The first day wasn't a miracle. The first day was merely, the oil was doing that which it's programmed in nature to do, to burn. It's supposed to do that. The additional 7 days are the days of miracle, not the first day. So really the holiday of Channukah should be a 7-day period, not an 8-day period. So why do we celebrate for 8 days? It should be 7 days of miracle and 1 day of natural burning. So what's going on over here? Why did our sages, when they established the holiday of Channukah, going back about 2,400 years ago, why did they make it an 8-day festival? Well, 8 days to correspond to the miracle of 8 days. It was a 7-day miracle, not an 8-day miracle, because the first day was natural. That's the question, the famous question we call the question of the Beit Yosef. And again, I have a book at home, a sefer, which offers 100 answers to this question. So I want to share I think a very, very poignant and beautiful answer that really speaks to miracles. In the story of Channukah, it's really a dual story that's happening. There is the story of the menorah, which is a story of an open miracle. But the main story of Channukah is really what we were speaking about, is the story of our spiritual resistance and our physical resistance, the war. The fact that we went to war and waged war to fight for what we believe, and we won. That we succeeded. It's really two things going on. And very interesting, that duality, you see the way we express it. We mefarseh the nes. We express the miracle out to the world with the menorah. But when we're praying in our Shemona Esrei 3 times a day, in the section called Modim, where we thank Hashem, Modim v'nachnu lach, we insert a paragraph, Al Nisim v'al Niflos v'al Tushuos, on all the miracles. And what do we speak about? About the war. And then how we defeated, how the few defeated the many, how the weak defeated the strong. It's all about the battles. So there are really two things going on over here. There's the open miracle of the menorah, and there's the hidden miracle of the war. Because it was a hidden miracle. Because each battle, one might say, well, we won because of natural reasons. We won because we knew the land better. We won because we had more motivation, whatever we want to say. But they were miraculous. It doesn't make sense. A small band of Torah scholars should not be able to defeat the most powerful army in the world. That's miraculous. But it's a miracle that's not visible always to the eye. You have to get below the surface to see it. So one answer the Beis Yosef says is the reason we keep the 8 nights of Channukah is, you're right. The first night is not a change in nature. For one night, oil does burn. 7 days after, you're right, that's a change in nature. But that first night of the oil burning is really commemorating another part of the miracle of Channukah, which was the war. In other words, God allowed something to burn for 8 days. Because why 8? Think about 8 by the way. 8 is always the Jewish symbol. The Maharal probably brings this down. 8 is always the Jewish symbol of going above nature. The word for 8 in Hebrew is shmoneh. If I rearrange those letters, by the way, or I put a different vowelization underneath it, it's pronounced shmena. Shmena in Hebrew means fat, excess. Maybe that's why we eat all that oil, and jelly donuts. Shmena means excess. What's excess? What's fat? It's going beyond that which is supposed to be there. 8 is always the number that symbolizes going beyond nature. Just like fat goes beyond what's supposed to be there. Shmena, it's excess. It doesn't belong there. It's breaking out of the natural. That's why 8 is always associated with miracle. What day do we take that little baby boy and we say, little baby boy, now we have to start fixing you up? The 8th day. 8th day of Brit Milah. Why? Because we're asking that little baby boy to go above his nature. It's true you have desires and passions, but we're going to make a covenant with God on the organ of passion, desire, to say, you're going to control your nature for God. Of course, with God, we control our nature for God. God controls nature for us. 8 symbolizes going above nature. So God lets it go for 8 days. Interesting also, you take that same word, shmoneh, shin mem nun hey. If I rearrange those letters, I can rearrange them to neshama, which means the soul. The soul is the part of the human being which is above nature. Not natural. It's planted from above down into us. It breaks out of nature. That's what the soul is. And if I rearrange those letters again, shmoneh, I can spell Mishnah. Mishnah, which is part of the oral law. The oral law which was given from God, from above nature, brought into this world. That's Torah. Mishnah, the learning of Torah, the Mishnah of the oral law. The oral law is like the whole Torah is something which originated above and was shot down below. It was given to us from the Creator. So 8 always speaks this idea of going above nature in all respects. So God says, I'm going to create an 8-day miracle. It's an 8-day miracle over here. Or 8 days, it's going to burn 7 days, but the holiday is set on 8 days. Why? Because I want you to understand the fact that that oil burnt beyond what it was supposed to have done, the fact that that oil changed nature and was an open miracle. I want you to utilize that and look now at the natural world. Look at things that you don't always see miracles in. Look at the war. Look at those battles. Look at it from a different perspective. Crush the olive and get to the oil and understand it was all miraculous. On the outside, it might not look that way. On the outside, it might look that the Jewish army was just good and trained and smart in the art. But that doesn't explain a victory like that. You have to get below the surface. And you have to understand that in what you think is natural is also miraculous. And that's why there are 8 days. That's the first answer he gives. Number one, what does that mean? It means, in other words, you're right, the first night, really, oil's supposed to burn that. 7 nights is unnatural. You're right, that corresponds to the miracle of the oil burning. But the first night of the 8 days of Channukah is to focus, to utilize, is to say to us, utilize the miracle of the Menorah which broke nature, to look back at that which is natural, understand that's also miraculous. Do we hear that? Utilize the burning 7 days beyond where it's supposed to be, so you look back at what you think is natural and realize that's also miraculous. God is in control of nature. And things that you think are natural, they're not natural at all. God is present there, and there are miraculous events occurring. And that's supposed to focus us on, specifically in this case, on those wars. But in a larger sense, we're supposed to go beyond looking at the miracle of the war, but look at the miracles of our lives. Things which we think are natural are not natural. It's God directing it and guiding it. There is no nature in this world. You know, the word for nature in Hebrew is teva. Teva. Tet beit ayin. If I vowel that a little differently, it's tiba. Tiba in Hebrew means to drown. Interesting, to drown. You can either see nature as, well, sometimes you can drown in nature. Meaning you can't see that God is directing it and controlling it. However, the gematria of hateva, which means the nature, I had a hey before it, hateva is the same numerical value as Elokim, which is 86. Because you could look at nature in one of two ways. You could either see the divine hand, or you could just be drowned in it and not be and just see nature for what it is and understand there's a director and there's a guide and there's someone from above who's controlling it. You know, we have a custom on Channukah to spin a dreidel. Oh no, I lost you, everybody. We have a custom on Channukah to spin a dreidel. When we spin that dreidel, what are we doing? We're taking our hand from above, spinning it and letting it go. You look at the dreidel, you say, oh, look, it's always been spinning, like a goggle, like a little circle. Because you can't see the hand anymore, because the hand was sputtered and left. That's a metaphor to us and for us about really what the holiday of Channukah is all about. That the natural world is being directed and spun, so to speak, by the Creator. It's not just going on its own. There's a guiding hand that's started it off, not just started off, but always in control, always holding on to it. You know, when I think of Channukah and this type of miracle, my mind just goes back to 1990. In 1990, there was a war, another war that Israel faced. And this was a war which we called the Gulf War, in which Saddam Hussein, Yimak Shemo, had an idea to invade Kuwait. Hashem put in the heart of George Bush, not George W. Bush, George Bush, the idea that this was immoral, this is wrong. George Bush put together a coalition of Europe, including Saudi Arabia, and they went to war against Saddam Hussein. It was on one condition, though, that Israel stays out of it, because if Israel was going to be in the Allies together with America, so apparently they would have lost Saudi Arabia, and they needed Saudi Arabia also to be part of the coalition. Israel was told to sit back and just don't do anything. At that time, Saddam Hussein had certain type of missile called Scud missiles, almost like rocket ships, and there was even concern that they were packed with chemicals. They weren't in the end, but in Israel, gas masks were distributed. People would seal the rooms in order to save them from gas attacks. It was called a cheder atum. People would take tape, going to the cheder atum when the siren rang and gas masks went on. And now what's interesting, in these Scud missiles, 39 fell on Israel. 39 Scud missiles. These missiles were almost like, again, rocket ships. And the explosions they caused destroyed apartment buildings, especially in Ramat Gan. What was so interesting is that not one Jewish person died as a result of these Scud missiles. It was amazing. I mean, you saw pictures of collapsed buildings, and everyone had a story. I went outside, I was at my neighbor's, I was helping somebody. Nobody was dying. It was something people couldn't understand. And just to put it in contrast, that apparently one of these Scud missiles was intercepted by an American patriot over Saudi Arabia. The debris alone falling on an American army camp unfortunately killed, I think, a couple hundred soldiers just by the debris of one of these falling missiles. Imagine what an explosion would do. And nobody was killed. This was something we were witnessing, almost open miracles before our eyes. Interesting, by the way, 39 is an interesting number in Judaism because 39 is the numerical value of Hashem Echad. Shem is Yud Hey Vav Hey, 26. Echad, Aleph Chet Dal is 13. Hashem is one. 39. 39 Scud missiles. And nobody killed. Open miracles. Something to marvel about. Yet, that was 1990. And how come we don't think about it? How come we've forgotten it? We witnessed open miracles, God involved in nature, changing nature before our eyes, saving life miraculously. Yet, it's not front and center in our mind. And the impact that it should make and could make is lost. Channukah says and speaks a language of don't lose that impact. 8 days of Channukah, 7 days of miracle, 1 day of natural oil burning, but you have to understand something. Look at that which you think is natural and see the miracle in it. Don't be swayed and fooled by this world. Understand this world is Hateva. It's guided by that hand that spins the dreidel. It's Elokim. It's a world which is connected to a source. That's the Jewish mission. That's the Jewish passion. That's what we're living for. That's what we're striving for. That's the message we're trying to bring out to the world. And B'ezrat Hashem, this Channukah should be a time when we have clarity in this, where we see so clearly that God is directing and controlling, and that everything in our life is a manifestation of His miracle, His guiding hand, His loving hand. And if we could do so, we'll truly have a joyous Channukah, which should be the means to usher us to a higher and new level of service to Hashem and awareness of His love in our life. I wish everybody a happy Channukah, and I look forward to continuing our discussion next week.